Hi and welcome to this week's core message. We are now on week 3 of our series called Stories and Songs. Just to refresh our memory, the aim for this series is for us to learn about character. So we're going to look at the character of God and we're going to think about how that shapes us and our character more into His likeness. And we're going to do that through the book of Psalms, which is like a collection of poems and songs. And a lot of these have been inspired by events in the life of individuals and some kind of in the events of lives of communities and nations, like the nation of Israel at the time. But for our time together, for the 8 weeks that we're going to be in the Psalms for, we're focusing on Psalms that have been inspired by the events in the life of David. Now, if you don't know David, if you've got no idea who he is, then you can definitely change that by going and reading a little bit about him. You can discover him in the first book of Samuel, in the second book of Samuel, in First Chronicles, also in First Kings. Those are all places in the Old Testament where you can find a little bit about him, about his life, who he was, where he came from, all these kinds of things. I think they're going to help you to get the best out of this series. But also, if you already do know David and you've already read those 10,000 times and thought about it a lot, then I just encourage you to stay with the series and just ask God to refresh your understanding of it, and just to speak to you again about these Psalms, and just to speak to you through them so that your character development can be shaped by Him as He chooses to reveal Himself to you through what we're doing together. So for this week we are in Psalm 34, and the event that this is linked to is found in 1 Samuel chapter 21 verses 10 onwards. And just to give you like a bit of a head start to that, so to speak, this happens at a time in David's life where things seem very unfair. He's been treated very unfairly by Saul. So if you've ever felt like someone's treating you unfairly, or like you've been dealt with in a way that's unjust or disproportionate, I think that this psalm is really going to resonate with you. I think you're going to relate with this psalm really, really well. So at this moment in time, for David, he has already been working for Saul, who's the king of Israel, for quite a long time. And at the beginning, when he went to the court of Saul, he was welcomed there, and Saul loved him, and he really valued him and saw the potential in him. And at the beginning, everything was kind of going well. But as time progressed and as David became increasingly good at what he did, he became very popular and very famous, and he became known nationwide for his military success, for his musicianship and artistry. And at this point in time, he had become more popular and more famous than Saul the king himself. And that probably led to some jealousy and some envy from Saul. And there might be other things at play here as well. There's probably a lot of layers, as there usually is when it comes to people. But for one reason or another, the attitude that Saul had towards David has totally changed, and now he hates him. Saul can't stand David. He's paranoid about what David might be up to. He just ultimately wants to get rid of David altogether, and he has made a plot to kill him. Now, David has not really deserved any of this. He hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't conspired against Saul. There's nothing here that David has done to, justify Saul's reaction. But because Saul is the king and, he has decided to kill David, he's kind of left with very few options, and he chooses to flee. And kind of events take shape, and at this point he's ended up fleeing outside of Israel, outside of what he knew. He's had to leave his family behind, he's had to leave his career behind, he's had to leave everything that he's ever known, the things that he's been building his life around, and go to a different country in hope that he might find refuge there, that he might not be killed. And even there, due to his fame and his popularity and everything, he's recognised. And now, because he's at what used to be enemy territory, he's almost caught in a rock and a hard place, so to speak. He's kind of in this situation where he can't go to Israel because Saul will kill him, but here the people might kill him because of what he's done in war against them previously. So things are really not going well for him at all, and I'm sure he felt like it was very, very unfair, that because Saul treated him in such a way that he almost took everything away from David by choosing to try and kill him, so that he was left at this point with nothing but his life. And now he's in this new place, and even there he's having to resort to this very unconventional method of kind of trying to make himself an object of ridicule, really, so that he wouldn't be perceived as a threat, and so that he can at least spare his life after it looks like everything else is gone. And then he finds that he can pass through safely, and he finds refuge, and the story goes on as you read. So Psalm 34 has been written as inspired by that event where David has lost everything, he's in this foreign place, and he's now having to resort to act in this very obscure manner in the hope that he's not killed. And Psalm 34 is sort of like a response to what David learned, I suppose, as a consequence of that experience. Now, in my research, I discovered that people have had, as people always do, many opinions about what David did and didn't do right in this. And I'll let you make your own mind up about it. I think when we're speculating about people's lives and we only have limited amounts of information, it's very difficult to know, what they should or shouldn't have done, and it's easy for us to have different opinions, and I think that's okay. But what's really, really good is that the psalmist here gives us that the takeaway that he wants us to have upon reflection of what David went through, whether he should or shouldn't have gone to the place that he did go to, whether he should or shouldn't have behaved in the way that he did. The psalmist gives us what he thinks that we should learn as a consequence of what David experienced, which is why I think this psalm is such a great tool for our character development, because it really does talk to us directly about what we can learn from what happened to David. So the beginning of this psalm is praise, which I think is remarkable. The very beginning, the first portion of this psalm, almost, it's just dedicated to praise and talking about who God is, and over it says that God is faithful, that he has heard David, that he has rescued him. It says in here, in verse 4, I sought the Lord and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all his troubles. So the psalmist here begins this poem, this beautifully crafted piece of art, for the first half, just talking about how good God is and how trusting in him never fails, how even in this circumstance, however dire it seemed, even though David had ended up in this point where it looked like everything was gone due to no fault of his own, where it really couldn't have got worse, he found that God was trustworthy, that even when life seemed so unfair, he found that God was just and that God was still good and that his ways were still good. He found that even in those moments, God heard him and that he wasn't forgotten, he wasn't left behind, that God was for him and with him, and that he did save him from all of his fears. Now, David must have been living with so much fear at that time. Fear of Saul, fear of these people that he's been in war with previously. He's already lost everything else, so he's really fearing for his life here. But the thing that he has learned here is that God has saved him from all of his fears, from all of his troubles. And the second half of this psalm is instruction. It gives us some things that the psalmist reckons that we can learn from David's experience, because he says this from verse 12 onwards. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking lies. Turn from evil and do good, seek peace and pursue it. So what the psalmist is saying here is that whoever loves life, whoever wants to experience life to its full, who wants to find fulfillment, who wants to grasp the things of life that really matter, that are really truly important, for those people he has some instruction. For those people he has some wisdom to impart that David has learned, or that we can learn from his experience. And it says, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. Now the word evil that's used in both verses 13 and 14, both in terms of what we speak and how we act, comes from the Hebrew word that talks about kind of breaking something. It kind of refers to destruction or breaking down. So what the psalmist is saying here is that even in these moments where it feels like you're being treated really unfairly, that even in those moments where, life is not going your way and it looks like you've lost things that were rightfully yours and you've been treated in a really unjust way, trust in God because he's still good, and trust in his ways. So do not compromise on your character. Don't be tempted to speak in a way that destroys somebody else or that is tearing them down or breaks them in some way. Keep away from the kind of talk that is going to be destructive, or that looks like breaking down or tearing down somebody else. And that in the way that you behave, turn away from the things that destroy others. Turn away from the kind of behavior that looks to break down and looks to destroy and looks to tear down, but instead seek peace and pursue it. Actively work towards peace. Look for opportunities to build bridges, to be at peace with the people around you, even when it's not fair, and even when it looks like what you have lost is something that you should not have lost due to any fault of your own. What the psalmist tells us is that the takeaway from David's experience is that regardless of what happens externally, the things that are truly valuable, the things that really bring fulfillment to us in life, are following God and trusting in him and trusting in his ways, in the ways in which we think, and in the way that we speak, and in the way that we respond. That when we choose him and his ways, we find peace and fulfillment in a way that none of the other stuff ever can. It's no promise of fame or fortune or success, but it is a promise of a fulfilled life that is lived with and to honor God. So as always, when we're talking about this, when we're looking through these verses, when we're thinking about what's happened in the life of David, and as we're kind of studying it and we're thinking about it, we're always looking to think about how we might live out the things that we've learned, live out the things that we are kind of talking about and learning. And I think for this week, the takeaway is pretty obvious. I think the psalmist gives it here to us, is that if you are right now going through a circumstance where you feel like you're not being treated fairly, where you feel like maybe somebody is dealing with you in a way that seems disproportionate or seems unjust, or you feel like you've missed out on things that should have been yours, I just want to encourage you to keep trusting God in those situations and to not compromise on character. Don't be tempted to take matters into your own hands and to try to resolve the matter, by getting vengeful, or, by trying to get your own back. The one thing that the psalmist thinks that we can learn is to avoid behaving in such a way, and instead seek peace and pursue it. Be actively looking for the opportunity to build peace with the people around you, even if they are not. That's what he thinks, that the psalmist thinks that we can do and that we can learn. And I think that's a pretty clear and obvious takeaway for us for this week. Now I really hope that you're not in that circumstance. I'm sure nobody's plotting to kill you, and I hope that you're not dealing with this at work or with family or with your neighbours or anywhere. I really do hope that you don't feel like you're being treated in this way, and if you don't, then maybe you can speak into and encourage this in the life of somebody who is going through this right now. I'm sure that if you tune in to the people around you, your family members, your friends, your co-workers, your neighbours, the people that you come into contact with, And if you listen to, what's going on in their worlds, it won't take you long and you'll find that somebody around you is probably dealing with something a little bit similar to feeling like, everything isn't that fair. So why don't you encourage them with what you've learned? Why don't you teach them that principle? Why don't you give them a different perspective, a different way to deal with that situation? Now, it doesn't have to be a lecture. It doesn't have to be an hour long. You don't have to make it really dramatic, and it doesn't have to be obvious. But in those conversations, look for opportunities to encourage them to trust God, and to encourage them to think in a different way, to have another perspective in the way in which that they're maybe responding to that situation. So again, if you are dealing with that right now, if you feel like life's not fair and you're being treated in a way that you don't deserve, then I just want to encourage you to let God speak to you through this, and to encourage you to keep responding in a way that is honouring to Him, to keep following Him, and to respond in a way that pursues peace, and to resist the temptation to compromise on character. But if you're not going through that, which I hope that you're not, then look for opportunities to teach that principle to somebody who is. Pass on what you've learned. Let the Holy Spirit use you and inspire and encourage somebody who is feeling like they're being treated like that, and just use what you have learned to help them shape the way that they respond to that situation around them. Okay, well, I hope that this has been helpful. I'd love to hear what you thought about this. I'd love to hear what God's saying to you about this psalm. So if you can, take the opportunity to connect with the people around you in your community, and chat through what it is that God's saying through this, and what it is that you are discovering in this, and how maybe God is helping you shape your response to those situations in your life. Well, I hope that you have a really good week, and I will see you soon.